So today I'm gonna do a story time, and today's gonna be like actually an emotional story time. So this story time is gonna be about how my dad is adopted, just kind of explaining how that process kind of came about. So my dad is originally from New York, so when he was born, let's back this up a little bit. So when I was a little kid, like, I've always known my dad was adopted. Like, my parents told me at a very young age that my grandparents that adopted him, that are still a part of my life today, are not his biological parents, or his adopted parents. So I already knew that he was adopted. I just didn't know everything about it till like later on. Like, I started asking questions and wanting to know. And so, my dad was adopted in New York by my grandmother, and how that happened was his mom, his biological mom, from what I know, was really young when she had him. She had him, my dad, and then had his sister, and they kept his sister but gave my dad up for adoption because I guess they couldn't afford to have 2 kids or something. I don't know. But anyway, so with my grandparents, my grandmother couldn't have children. Like, they tried to have children, and she ended up not being able to for various reasons. And so she was devastated, always wanted kids, and knew she wanted kids. So then they started going through the adoption process because she knew she still wanted kids, even though she couldn't have her own. And she went to New York and found my dad, and he was like a little baby when they got him, like a couple weeks or months old, something like that, a couple months old at least. And they decided to get him, and they got him, and my grandma was just so in love, so happy she had had her first child, her first son. My grandfather was overjoyed as well. Like, he was very happy to have my dad and everything like that. Now, I personally, it upsets me about the adoption only because when my dad was 18 and he wanted to know who his parents were and like what about them and his sister and stuff like that, he went all the way, him and my mom went all the way to New York to figure out who they were at 18 years old. So 18 and 19, they went all the way to New York to figure out who they were. And when they went there, like, they knew the hospital and all that type of information that his mom gave him. But when they got there, they found out that it was a closed adoption. So pretty much, if I ever want to know who they are, it's going to be like I need to hire a private investigator just to figure out who they are and who my aunt is, because he still has a sister. So I have an aunt and 2 grandparents that I have no idea who they are, their names, nothing. Like, all I know is his mom was like 18 when she had him, and then like 17 when she had his sister, and his dad's like way older, and it just seemed like it wasn't a good family situation because it sounds like his dad was using drugs or something like that, and that's part of the reason they gave him up. Now, I don't understand why they kept his sister over him. I don't know. And that's always upset my dad and always affected my dad negatively, knowing that they picked her over him pretty much. Now, my grandparents I'm lucky to have my adopted grandparents. They are the best grandparents I've ever had. My grandfather was literally like a dad to me. He raised me. And my grandmother, she sat there and she supported me and my sisters. We'd always go over to their house, and they'd always let us stay the night for weeks. They always took us on vacations, always took us to toy stores, did a bunch of stuff with us all the time. So I have nonstop love for them and nonstop happy memories. Now, the sad part about this story is my grandfather actually passed away a year ago, and that, for me, has been really, really hard, along with all of my family, because, like I said, my grandfather was like a dad to me. I loved him, I respected him, even when he was really sick and needed someone to take care of him. I was staying in the house, taking care of my grandfather and, like, helping my grandma with him. And that was devastating to see him like that. He's always been a very, very independent person, And for him to have to not be independent anymore and go through, okay, now I need someone to take care of me, was also very hard for him. Like, it was devastating. He didn't want someone to take care of him. He didn't want any of that. And so now, for me, the problem with it being adopted, like my dad being adopted, is I constantly have questions that will never be answered. The only way I can answer these questions or even know is if I myself go out, hire a private investigator, take the information that I know from my dad, like the hospital, where he was born, that type of stuff, and tell him, okay, I want to know who these people are. I'm paying you to figure this out. Now, that's not cheap. I can't do that right now. And I've always wanted to do it. I've wanted to do it since I was a kid. I've always wanted to, because I always want to know who my blood family is. Everybody wants to know who their family is. Now, when you have a parent that is adopted and it's a closed adoption, it is literally impossible to be able to answer those questions. My dad has all these questions he can't even answer himself, nor can his mom or anything. His adoptive mom, my grandmother, who's still around, still alive today, she also has questions, like wants to know who his sister is, his mom, and his dad. But she can't even answer those questions herself because of it being a closed adoption. Back then, when my dad was adopted, it was very, very common to have a closed adoption.